If you can tell me what you want, I can tell you how to get it. The problem with the great majority of individuals is not with their ability to achieve their goals in life, but rather with the failure to understand two factors vital to successful living. The first is to make the decision as to what it is we want enough to give it most of our attention until it's been achieved, and to clearly define it. And the second is to fully understand that we have the ability to achieve this goal, or we wouldn't want it in the first place. The next vital rule to successful living is to understand we can achieve nothing without paying the price. Now, what is that price? Well, it's many things. First, it's understanding emotionally as well as intellectually that we literally become what we think about, that we must control our thoughts if we're to control our lives. It's understanding fully that as ye sow, so shall ye reap.
My old friend Dr. Norman Vincent Peale put it this way: this is one of the greatest laws in the universe. Fervently do I wish I had discovered it as a very young man. It dawned upon me much later in life, and I found it to be one of the greatest, if not my greatest discovery outside of my relationship to God. The great law, briefly and simply stated, is that if you think in negative terms, you will get negative results. If you think in positive terms, you will achieve positive results. That is the simple fact, he went on to say, which is at the basis of an astonishing law of prosperity and success. In 3 words, believe and succeed. George Bernard Shaw said, people are always blaming their circumstances for what they are. I don't believe in circumstances. The people who get on in this world are the people who get up and look for the circumstances they want, and if they can't find them, make them. Well, it's pretty apparent, isn't it? And every person who discovered this for a while believed that he was the first one to work it out. We become what we think about. Now, it stands to reason that a person who's thinking about a concrete and worthwhile goal is going to reach it, because that's what he's thinking about, and we become what we think about. Conversely, the man who has no goal, who doesn't know where he's going, and whose thoughts must therefore be thoughts of confusion and anxiety and fear and worry, becomes what he thinks about. His life becomes one of frustration and fear and anxiety and worry. And if he thinks about nothing, he becomes nothing.
Programming your mind for success. You know that a computer, if you program a computer, it simply operates on the basis of the computer, on the basis of the programming. If you want to get different results in your outer world, you have to put in a different program for your mental programmer. So this is how we do it. We say your self-concept is your bundle of beliefs inside that determines everything that happens to you. Remember, all change begins with a change in your self-concept, the way you see yourself and think about yourself and believe about yourself. There was a man many years ago, very famous, true story. His name was Victor Sarabriakov. And Victor Sarabriakov was the parent of immigrant laborers who came over from Russia. And he grew up and he went to school, and he seemed to float through school. He did whatever schoolwork was necessary, but he daydreamed a lot, and sometimes he read other things and looked out the window. And they concluded that he was probably mentally retarded, did not really have, he had learning deficiencies, wasn't really set up to be very successful. And so he went all the way up to the 10th, 12th grade, and he was still looking out the window, and he sat down with his counselor in the 12th grade, and they suggested that he join the Army. Because in the Army, he could get a nice job where they would provide for him for 25 or 30 years, and then he could have a nice pension. So he went in and he applied. So he went in to enlist, and they said fine, and his background was average grades in high school and laborer for 2 years. Not great Army material. So they gave him a battery of psychological and intelligence tests. When they came back with the test, his IQ scored at 172. And they said, no, there's something wrong here with this test, this score. So they tested him again. They had him take the test again, came out at 176. His IQ was higher than Einstein's of 170. They couldn't believe it. They took him in and they sat him down, and they said, Mr. Sarabriakov, you're one of the smartest, you're the smartest person who's ever tried to enlist in the Army. And he said, yeah, but I got terrible grades throughout school. And they had a psychologist there, and he said, well, it's because you basically have a photographic memory. You memorized everything there was to learn in school. The instant it was first mentioned, it was completely boring for you. That's why you were looking out the window all the time. He said, that's true. He said, I never failed an exam because he learned everything like a sponge absorbs water. They said, Mr. Serebryakov, if you'll join the Army and you'll go into our nuclear physicist training, we will put you through university if you will stay in the Army for 4 years after your degree. And he said, sounds good to me. When his time was up at 30, he started his own company, which is in Los Angeles, and Serebryakov Industries. Within something like 2 years, he had 6 major high-tech patents, each of which was sold and licensed for millions of dollars. By the time he was 35, he still lives in Los Angeles today. He's worth millions and millions of dollars, one of the brightest people that they'd ever seen in terms of his creative ability. But he didn't know. He'd been programmed from his poor parents and his childhood and the teachers that paid no attention to him to believe he was not very smart. And when they finally showed him how smart he was, he just changed his programming. When he changed his programming, this guy became a mental machine. He was a genius of the highest order. So it's very possible for us to change all of our external results by changing our programming about ourselves.
You see, and if you want to have the results only 5% of the population has, you've got to be willing to think and behave like only 5% of the population. The victim is addicted to distraction. We live in a world that's so interesting right now. A lot of people are behaving in ways they see people on the social media behaving, even though that's not right for them. It's an incredible world right now. Most people on the planet today are followers. Most people don't think for themselves. They're brainwashed. They're hypnotized. They're plugged into the matrix. They're watching all the media, and they're being hypnotized and programmed into a way of living that I believe is heartbreak at the end. According to the latest research, on an average day, we're spending 2.1 hours a day in distraction. We are being interrupted by technology every 11 minutes. And it takes 20 minutes to focus your mind back on the work that you were doing before you were distracted. Edison was one of the greatest geniuses of humanity. You know one of Edison's key protocols? His Menlo Park. Edison's Menlo Park. He had this place where he and his small band of workers would go to, and they would get away from the world, and there was no distractions, no interruptions. And by doing that, he allowed the natural power of his brain to focus on ideas that change the world. Here's the thing, when you get away from distraction, when you start to focus on that one piece of work that you want to take to world class, your neocortex, which is the seat of reasoning, starts to shut down. You see, because you never do your best work from the intellect, you do it from a deeper place. Your neocortex starts to shut down, and your brain waves shift from beta to alpha. Every day when you're at work doing distractions, being interrupted, living the daily life, your brain is in beta. But if you look at geniuses, they're operating at alpha waves. Once your brain shifts from beta to alpha, a pharmacy of mastery is created. Cortisol, which is the fear hormone, starts to reduce. A lot of us are in fear every day. We don't even know it. That's why we don't take risks. That's why we don't push the envelope. That's why we don't innovate. That's why we're afraid to be ourselves. Cortisol. When you're away from distraction, cortisol comes down. Dopamine, the inspirational neurotransmitter, is released. And serotonin is released. And a pharmacy of mastery is actually created in your brain when you go into that quiet space to do very focused, concentrated work. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi of University of Chicago calls this the flow state. Every single one of us can create flow in our work. And when you get into flow, that's when the athletes do otherworldly things. That's when the great painters create these masterpieces. That's when the great leaders do world-class work.